Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more automation, the car company tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison car company in 2002. In this video, we're going to be looking at the Edison Constellation, which is the flagship large sedan in the Edison car company lineup, which is very much comfort-oriented. That is the stat that we concern ourselves with the most. And the body I chose is this one here, and we have the four-door variant of that. With the chassis, I went with monocoque, 8HS steel, front longitudinal, double wishbone, both front and rear. Again, comfort-oriented, and this is where you're going to get a good comfort. Now, I could go even better with multi-link suspension, for instance, but I think that's a little bit beyond what I want to get into in this time period. I don't know if that's really all that common, in any case, in 2002. And then we have corrosion-resistant steel for the panel material. As far as styling goes, again, went with a little bit of a simpler design here, and I tried to go with a little bit more chrome, trying to bring that chrome back. And there you have it. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the engine. Now, this is a longitudinal rear-wheel drive setup for the base trim with a V6, and that V6 is producing 237 horsepower and 216 foot-pounds of torque. But because I do not have a separate video for it, let's go ahead and go over the selections I made. So this is a V6. It's got aluminum silicone for the block material as well as the head. It comes in with a 3.6-liter displacement, and this is the bore and stroke that I used to get that. And it's a single overhead cam with 3 valves per cylinder with VVL. Cast iron crank, I-beam steel, and forged pistons. And the varying capacity is not anything different. Compression comes in at 10.5. Cam profile is 33, and VVL is at 60. So you do see a little bit of a bump in the curve that you can see here, as I discussed in a previous video. This also has VVT, naturally aspirated, with multi-point electronic fuel injection. This has a twin throttle setup with a standard intake. It's using premium fuel, though, and we have a little bit richer fuel than I normally go with, and a lot of that was just balancing some of the advantages I could have with the VVL, having a lower cam profile, and then bringing up the fuel mixture, giving me a little bit more horsepower, but balancing that with that cam profile to get actually better economy than I was getting before. Because as you lower the cam profile, you're also lowering the economy, which I could demonstrate to you, but I would start knocking, because one thing it does do is take up more fuel octane. But just to show you the reverse, if we go up, you can see the economy is getting worse, but we're also not having as much of a requirement with the fuel octane. In any case, going back to the fuel system, my ignition timing is set to 33, and my RPM limit is at 7,100 RPM. Short cast headers. This is a dual exhaust setup with a 3-way cat and 2 reverse flow mufflers. I have 2 reverse flow mufflers because we're trying to quiet this down. This is about comfort, after all. And we already discussed what the end performance was. So let's go ahead and hop into the actual trim here. And starting off with the gearbox, I have a 5-speed automatic. Now, I had a 5-speed automatic in previous year periods Comet. So I figured we would transfer that technology over to the Constellation. Considering it is our flagship sedan, I think it should get some of the higher tech that we have available before the other models do. So it does have a 5-speed automatic. And I have a viscous LSD. And the gear ratio setup is more or less, all of the gears are used predominantly for acceleration. I do have that 5th gear going a little bit beyond, though, to give us a little bit better economy. We still do have a little bit of wheel spin, though. In any case, moving along to the tire setup, I have medium compound road, Wheel diameter comes at 660 millimeters, and we have 17-inch rims. I have alloy rim material, though, as opposed to the steel rims we've been seeing on most of the other models so far. And we have a tire width of 205s in the front and 225s in the rear, with some rim offset in the front to fill out the tire profile in the body, but also gives us a little bit of enhanced drivability. As far as the brake setup goes, I have a 2-piston solid disc in the front and a single piston solid disc in the rear, brake sizes being as large as I could make them with the rim diameter. As a result, we do have a little bit of brake fade, but it's in acceptable levels in my opinion. Fully clad under tray, with the cooling airflow being roughly 10 above the required cooling. Interior comes in with 5 seats and standard interior and entertainment, and then power steering and ABS as standard, as well as safety being standard. Suspension, I have progressive springs, and again, this is for the comfort aspect of things, as you can see the difference between comfort and standard. Now, I know I could get more comfort with some of these other options, but then you're starting to get into a lot of money, and that I don't think is necessarily appropriate. This is not a full-on luxury car. This just has a more comfort-oriented build, not necessarily a true luxury car. Gas monotube, again, better comfort out of that. We have a passive sway bar, and this is the suspension setup that I went with. This is more or less the normal preset with some tweaking, as for instance, I have stiffer dampers in the front to deal with some of the bumpiness that I was getting than I do in the rear. And just to show you what I oftentimes see with the behavior of the front end of the vehicle and why I make it stiffer in the front, if you watch the red line here, which is the front wheel, as I soften the damper, you'll note that the curve starts to change a little bit. And as we get to about here, you'll note that the curve here, so it goes up like this, curves around, then we have a curve here, but you'll notice as I start to soften the dampers, we have another curve here. So to eliminate that curve, you'll see as I stiffen the dampers, the line starts to even out and become more curvy. And with a little bit stiffer dampers up front, you'll have this nice curve here, which we see also happening in the rear. So I'm trying to mimic the same kind of curve. Now, the lines aren't exactly on top of each other, but mimic the same kind of curve we're getting in the rear as we are getting in the front. And to do that, oftentimes I'm having to do stiffer dampers up front. But in any case, let's go ahead and jump into the test track here. So we get a top speed of 159.7 miles an hour, a little over 3,500 pounds. And weight distribution is not too bad, pretty even for a front-engined car. And 0 to 62 time comes in at 8.7 seconds. And fuel economy I didn't really show previously, or didn't discuss, but we come in with 21.1 miles per gallon. So with that being said, let's go ahead and run the time for the airfield track. And we get 1 minute 34.97, so more or less 1 minute 35. So let's jump into the next trim out of a lot of trims to choose from, which is the 3.6 Premium. Now, this is just going to be the same trim with, so the gearbox setup is roughly the same. It's probably a little bit more aggressive to try and get the 0 to 62 time closer to where it was with the standard trim, because the main addition we have with this premium trim is a premium interior, which is going to increase the weight of the vehicle quite a bit. And you do see some extra brake fade here as a result of that. Cooling airflow, though, is the same. But here's where we get the big difference. So I have premium interior, premium entertainment, and we have a couple extra options here: traction control and electronic stability control. And if we deselect these, you can see what happens as a result. So with traction or control, we get a little bit more drivability, although we lose off-road ability. And then electronic stability control, we see more or less the same, but much more of a big difference here in the drivability. So this is really going to enhance that drivability. Of course, it does push up the material cost as well. Okay, and suspension might have some tweaking as well because of the difference in weight. Let's now get our test track time. So top speed is 159.4 miles an hour. I think a slight dip there. We definitely have more weight now. And let's go ahead and run our time to see the difference. So now we have 1 minute 35.79. So we lost almost a second of overall time. So finally, we have one more trim with the 3.6 liter V6, and that is the premium all-wheel drive. I figured adding on an all-wheel drive option onto this vehicle was a pretty decent choice, considering that this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle. You get a little bit more traction, and I think this would be a very attractive model to a lot of people. In any case, starting off with, actually, let's just show that it is all-wheel drive indeed. So if we come over here, we see that it is now longitudinal all-wheel drive. But it's still the same engine and more or less the same trim setup. So we still have a 5-speed automatic, but the gearbox setup is probably quite a bit different. It looks a little bit more aggressive here, and we do get a better 0 to 62 time as a result, 8.6 seconds. But otherwise, pretty much the same, other than, of course, we have the power distribution setup, which is set up to 30 to the front and 70 to the rear. That means 30% of the power goes to the front and 70% to the rear, in case you're not familiar with that concept. The tire setup is more or less the same. Brake setup is going to be the same, although we will notice a little bit more brake fade as the vehicle will be heavier with the addition of all-wheel drive, as well as the fuel economy dropping off a little bit as well. Cooling airflow is going to be the same, as this is still the same engine. The interior setup is going to be the same as well. This is still the premium trim, just with the addition of all-wheel drive. And then finally, the suspension is going to be probably slightly different again because of more weight. For instance, I can tell the dampers are a little stiffer both in the front and the rear. Now, the end result as far as the test track goes is we have a top speed of 156.8 miles an hour. Again, we're still heavier. And as we discussed, we have a quicker 0 to 62 time. So let's go ahead and get our overall time. Now, the question is, do you think it's faster or slower? Well, it's slower. 1 minute 36.77. It might seem like it should have been faster with a quicker 0 to 62 time, but you do have to take into account the increase in weight and also possibly worse handling as a result. So we do see a decrease here in the overall time. I'm not sure how much of a difference, though, the top speed is. We could see that really quickly here, just jumping between the two premium trims. So we had 156.8 and 159.4. So you see the top speed is definitely lower as well because of the gearbox setup. So that could be another reason why we got a quicker time with the non-all-wheel drive version of the model. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the V8 powered Constellation. And let's first look at the engine. Now, this is the rear-wheel drive trim here with the standard interior setup. So this is a V8. It's got an aluminum silicone block and head, just as we had with the V6. It has a 5-liter displacement, and these are the bore and stroke that I used to get that. And it is, again, a single overhead cam with 3 valves per cylinder and still VVL. Again, we have cast iron crank, I-beam steel, and forged pistons. Compression comes in at 10.2, cam profile 34, and VVL profile 53. So there's not quite a big of a difference of the cam profile and the VVL profile that we saw with the V6. And again, this is naturally aspirated. Multi-point EFI. Again, twin throttle setup, standard intake, and premium fuel. Fuel mixture is a little bit more lean in this vehicle, and we have more ignition timing. And it doesn't rev quite as high. We have 6,900 RPM limit. Again, short cast, dual exhaust, three-way cat with 2 reverse flow mufflers, again, keeping it quiet. The end result is 318 horsepower and 307 foot-pounds of torque. So let's go ahead and take a look at the trim setup now. So we have, again, a 5-speed automatic, but this time we're using that 5th gear much more for economy than we were in the past. And the end result is we get 19.3 miles per gallon, which is honestly not that big of a difference between the V6, only a couple miles a gallon. And we have a 0 to 62 time. Quite obviously, it should be faster, and it is, 7.3 seconds. But we do have more wheel spin to contend with because of that increase in power. Still, we have a viscous LSD here. And medium compound tires, same rim diameter, more or less. The tire setup is the same, not much has changed. But we do have a little bit of an upgrade here. We have vented discs in the front, but otherwise the brakes are more or less the same, and this is to eliminate some of the brake fade that we're experiencing. Cooling airflow will be different because of the difference in engine, but again, it's going to be roughly 10 above the required. The interior setup should be the same as the other standard trim. Now, there is going to be some slight differences with the suspension because of a difference in weight from the V6 powered standard trim. And let's go ahead and take a look at the test track here. So we have a top speed of 169.9 miles an hour. We're coming in a little over 3,700 pounds. Weight distribution is a little bit more front heavy than what we saw in the other standard trim, but we have a heavier V8 up front, so that makes sense. And but definitely we have a quicker 0 to 62 time than what we saw before. So let's go ahead and run the track time. And we can see that we got it in with 1 minute 32.21 seconds. So no surprise here, this is the quickest trim thus far. Now let's slow it down a bit with our premium trim with the V8. Now this is going to be very similar to the way the premium trim was with the V6. So we're a little bit slower 0 to 62 time as a result of that increase in weight, as well as a little bit worse fuel economy. Wheel spin is actually a little bit less, though, because of that weight. You have more weight on the wheels. But the tire setup is going to be more or less the same. Brake setup is going to be the same as well, so we do have a little bit more brake fade. Cooling airflow should be the same as the other V8. Interior setup is going to be just like the other premium trim with the V6. And then finally, suspension setup should be more or less roughly the same as it was with the other V8 trim. Maybe some slight differences because of weight, maybe not. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the test track here. So we now have a top speed of 169.7 miles an hour, so a little bit worse. We're a little bit heavier. So I think we can all expect this is going to be a little bit slower, less 0 to 62 time, less top speed, and so on. So let's go ahead and run the time. And the end result is 1 minute 32.7. So not too big of a departure between the two trims. Actually less than half a second, so that's good to see. Let's now jump into the all-wheel drive variant. I mean, we have an all-wheel drive variant with the V6. Why not with the V8? So let's start with the gearbox again. So we have a 5-speed automatic, and the 0 to 62 time comes in at 7.3 seconds, which I think was about the same as the standard V8. But we definitely have worse fuel economy now, 18.5 miles per gallon. And I still have the same 30 to 70 power distribution that we saw before. Tire setup is going to be the same. Of course, we do not have any wheel spin now because we have more of the power going up front, and that gives us more overall traction. We are going to see about the same brake fade as we saw with the other premium trim. So I guess that weight addition did not really affect our braking all that much, at least as far as brake fade. It might have made our overall distance a little bit worse, though. The airflow should be the same. Interior the same. Suspension, I expect a little bit of differences here and there, although I'm not really noticing any that jump out at me. So let's go ahead and get our test track time here. So top speed is at 169 miles an hour, so we're still dropping down a little bit more. We have more weight. Now the 0 to 62 time is the same as it was with the standard trim, but I think we can expect, because of that increase in weight and the reduction in top speed, that this is going to be a little bit slower. And we do see that that is indeed the case. We almost lose a whole second between the premium trim without all-wheel drive to the all-wheel drive version here. All right, so that wraps up the setup of all the different trims. Let's now get into the project setup. So just as I have done with all the other models, I set up the team here, and my focus is more for learning, as this is our flagship sedan, so it's going to have a little bit more higher tech and more design effort put into it. And I did the same thing with the engine as well, although technically it is the same engine that is in the Asteroid. It is a variant of that engine. Let's move on to the factory setup. So I have a huge factory here, and the main reason I have a huge factory is because we have 6 trims, and the only way I can produce all 6 trims is to have a huge factory. There's no way around that with the way the game works currently. So as far as the way I set things up, I went with 80 automation, which is what I'm doing in this year period. I went from 75 in 96, now I'm up to 80 in 2002. Now the shifts I brought down all the way. Because I wanted to lower the production down significantly, considering that this is I don't want this to be a huge production number car, but because we're in a huge factory, we're going to get naturally a lot more numbers than we would have in the large factory, which we typically use. In any case, this is the distribution of all the trims. Now, there's a lot of trims here, and it takes quite a bit of deciding on which trim you think is going to sell the most, be the most desirable. And I figured that premium all-wheel drive trim would be the most desirable, as it, ticks a lot of boxes. But with that V6, you don't have some of the drawbacks with the V8, and you have lower cost too. So I think the V6 would be the more attractive of the all-wheel drive trims, and you have that premium interior to make things nice. For the consumer. I definitely, in my opinion, this would be the vehicle that would see the most sales. But again, that's my opinion, and I could be wrong. Moving on to the engine. So I put this in a large factory because I figured that with the production numbers that we have and them distributed between the V6s and the V8s, that we wouldn't need that much in the way of numbers. So we're producing 515 engines here of the V6. All right, so what we're seeing under the engine production tab here is an apparition caused by a mistake I made when I was originally designing the Constellation. So I made 2 variants of the V6 engine that I'm putting in the Constellation, just as I made 2 variants of the V8 engine. So one for the Asteroid and one for the Constellation. Well, when I selected the V6 as the engine I wanted to use, it pre-selected the Asteroid variant. And I wasn't paying close attention, and I didn't really pick that up. So I went through the entire design process using the Asteroid variant of the engine. Even this part was done with the Asteroid variant of the engine. Well, after I noticed my mistake, I went back and I fixed all of the different trims, so they're using the Constellation variant. But I didn't fix this part, so we're still seeing it selecting the Asteroid engine. And let's go ahead and switch that to the Constellation engine, which is the one we want to be using. And also, we're going to have to change it so that the production is roughly about where it was before. So I'm going to need a little bit more shifts to produce out those engines. So it was 515, so I'll get a little bit above that. So we're going to have to, change things around a little bit as we go. And let's see if we can actually deselect the Asteroid variant when we're done here. So I'm going to assume the same thing's going to happen with the V8 here, which, yes, indeed it is. So we need roughly 354 engines with the Constellation variant. Now, the Constellation variant is, takes more production units to make, so it's going to take a little bit longer to get that. We're going to need, there we go. All right, so now that we have these deselected, let's see if we can go back to the project tab, go to the engine, and see if we can deselect the asteroid. Doesn't appear that I can, which is odd, considering that it's saying that none of the trims use it. Oh well, that's just, I guess, an apparition caused by the mistake that I made accidentally designing the model with the wrong variant of engine. As I said, I fixed it later, but we're seeing a little bit of an after effect of that. In any case, let's go ahead and take a look at the market share data now. Starting off with the standard V6 trim and the normal 5% markup that I use in all the different models for consistency, we have a price of a little over $15,000. On the three market segments we do the best in is Pony, Muscle, and Sport Budget. Now, it seems like we always do well in the Pony segment, regardless of what the actual design of the vehicle is. And with these larger, more powerful vehicles, we oftentimes do pretty well in the Muscle segment. But usually we don't do well in both. That's kind of interesting. But the main thing that we're actually looking for here is more the family premium, I would say. And we're not necessarily doing terribly in that. We still have a competitiveness over 90, but we're not doing nearly as well as we are in these three market segments. And we have a number of market segments where we're doing over 100. I just don't really envision this vehicle being a accurately fitting into the fun market segment. For instance, it says a small everyday use car that is practical but agile and fun to drive. Doesn't really describe the Constellation very well, but I guess it does pretty well in that market segment. So there you go. I understand the muscle car, and I kind of understand the pony car segment here, but also Sport Budget. All right, so maybe it's a little bit of a failure in the design on my part, trying to fit the market segments we're trying to go for. Let's see if we address that with the premium trim here. All right, so now we've jumped up in price by more than $2,000, and we're no longer doing the best in the pony segment, but instead we're now doing the best in the sports budget segment and the close behind the muscle car segment. So again, these two. And then we're doing really well in the utility sports segment. Again, I couldn't tell you why, because the Constellation isn't necessarily a sport utility vehicle. But as far as the family premium segment goes, we're now doing better than 100. So we're doing pretty well on the market segments we're trying to do well in. We're doing a lot better in some market segments we're not trying to do well in. All right, let's now look at the premium all-wheel drive. And I have a feeling that we're still going to do pretty well in the utility sport segment. As a matter of fact, we're doing better in that than we are in the muscle car segment. All right. So yes, we're doing very well. As a matter of fact, the best in the utility sport segment. Then we're doing fairly well in the sports budget and muscle car segment as well. Let's look at that family premium segment. So we're still doing better. It's still over 100 and definitely better than it was before. So very interesting market segments that we're hitting with this model. Okay, let's now jump into the V8 standard trim. And I'm very curious what market segments we're going to hit with this. Okay, so we're still pretty much hitting the same segments we were with the other standard trim. So pony, muscle, and sport. Now we're doing a lot better in these segments. Doing the best in the pony segment. And we're also noticeably doing well in the utility sport segment. That's very interesting. As far as the family premium, not bad. Still doing pretty well. And then we have family sport premium. We get over 100 in. All right, now let's jump things up to the premium trim. And I have a feeling that these things are going to shift around a little bit as a result. So the pony segment is no longer one of our stronger segments. Now the muscle car segment is our strongest one by a significant margin. Then we have the utility sport, and then close behind it, the sport budget. How are we doing in the family premium, though? Now we're doing, again, above 100, and family sport premium pretty good as well. And fun premium, not too bad either, pretty decently. And then finally, we have the last trim, the all-wheel drive, which I assume we're going to do the best in utility sport, but you never know until you see. So actually, the muscle car segment still is our strong segment here. with over 140, but we definitely increased our utility sport performance as well. And this is the most expensive of our trims, coming in at almost $19,000. Okay, let's go ahead and take a quick look at a comparison of the Constellation with the two models we have thus far seen videos of. So as far as drivability goes, the Constellation is a strong performer as far as the models that we've produced so far. And if we even take a look at the previous year's Constellation, this is a significant boost. Now, you do have to take into account the fact that we are using traction control and stability control and some of the premium trims here. But for instance, standard versus standard, it is still a significant increase. As far as sportiness, though, not too big of a difference that it really is something that you can write home about. Comfort, it looks about roughly the same, although we do a little bit better in some areas. For instance, the standard trim versus the standard trim, where we are doing quite a bit better, but premium versus premium, we're doing about the same with a slight edge in the V8s. Now, as far as the other two models we have thus far, it's not too surprising that the Constellation here is the biggest performer or best performer in the comfort segment, considering that that's what we build it around. Although the premium trim here competes decently with our standard trims, for instance. It actually outperforms them. But that's not too surprising, I would say. Now, as far as prestige goes, comparing it to our previous model, I would say a slight improvement. And definitely over the performance of all of our other two models. But again, not too surprising. This is a small economy car, and this is a midsize family sedan. This is a large flagship sedan, so I think the prestige, makes sense that it's better there, as well as the safety being better, and we do see a difference here. But of course, this is later on too, and we do have, I believe, a heavier vehicle, which is going to impact safety as well. Now, as far as practicality goes, this is our least practical vehicle, and off-road ability is about the same as our other models, although we do have slight edges with our all-wheel drive, and it does look like a slight dip from our previous year period, except for, of course, the all-wheel drive versions are a little bit better than our previous off-road performance. As far as utility goes here, I would say roughly the same comparatively, although we do have, I would say, a slight dip here and there. But it does perform better than most of our other trims thus far. And reliability is not quite as good as our other two models, but I would say comparable with our last year period. Fuel economy has definitely improved over the previous year period, as we were using some better tech to get those numbers. And, of course, it is not as good as our other two trims are. Our Luna getting the best performance thus far. As far as weight goes, this is heavier than the previous year period and all of the other vehicles that we have, although emissions-wise, we are doing a lot better. Again, we're using higher tech that may be giving us some of those results. As far as production units, though, it is taking us longer to produce, and our vehicle overall is more expensive. But again, we're using higher tech, so that makes sense that that is occurring. As far as our other models, again, this takes longer to make and is more expensive, which you would expect out of the kind of vehicle that this is compared to the kind of vehicles these are. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.